Welcome to another episode of Medicine 3.0, your podcast for precision medicine, AI, and medicine. This week, I'm very excited to talk to Shalin Shah. He is the CEO of Marius Pharmaceuticals, and they have a product called Kyzatrex, which is oral testosterone. It's something that I often prescribe for my patients who need testosterone. I was really excited to dig in with him because I feel like testosterone is so misunderstood, and how we get that testosterone to the right people so they can have the right benefit is so important. So this was a great conversation. He's so knowledgeable about testosterone, about the space. So I think you're going to really enjoy it. All right, Shalin, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Jared. Real excited to be here.
Well, I'm really excited for the audience to get to know you, your product, and everything you do. But starting off, how about you tell us how you got where you're at, knowing what you know?
Sure. So let's, I guess, rewind. 8-10 years here. That's how long I've been involved in the testosterone space. In some sense, it really, I've always had an interest in health and wellness. In my previous life, I was on the investment side, so we did look at all sorts of companies, but certainly health and wellness. We're actually involved in the Vitamin Shop, who is actually a partner, now today, and we'll get to that. But always had this general interest, right? And I think this drug Kyzatrex came across the desk in around 2015 timeframe, when the FDA actually had come in and they changed some labels around this class. There was a lot of commotion, a couple bad studies had come out around cardiovascular risk, and a lot of lawsuits actually as well. So at the time, there was not an oral testosterone product on the market. This was in development in phase 2. And again, came across the desk and really started digging very deep into testosterone and speaking to a lot of experts, speaking to patients, and came to the conclusion that this thing has really been vilified, testosterone that is, and it didn't make a lot of sense. From an objective perspective, I thought if this molecule was discovered today, it would actually just be the most valuable molecule on the planet, given all of the areas that it affects in a human body. Effectively, there is an androgen receptor on every organ in the body, so there is a critical role for this metabolic hormone, but it's not perceived that way. So again, continue to dig in and eventually got involved with the company, took it through phase 3 trials, and then when we decided to commercialize the asset, then I think that's sort of been the last chapter here. And we decided to take a different approach with the drug, with Kyzatrex, make it a cash-based product. We're thinking about access. How are patients really going to get this thing? And, as today the discussion is so fervent around healthcare, access, insurance, right? We knew that the writing was on the wall and we had to take a different approach if we wanted this drug to have the impact that we think it really could. So again, long story, but I think the crux is, as I continue to peel back the layers of the onion on this testosterone story, it only became more and more compelling. So I think for us, while we have Kyzatrex, and naturally we'll talk about that, what we're out there doing is really trying to educate people on the importance of this as a metabolic hormone. What are the areas that it impacts, and how can people be a better advocate for themselves in this arena as they're dealing with their own healthcare journey.
Yeah. A couple things you mentioned that I want to dig in on. One, you mentioned that Kyzatrex, this testosterone drug, is oral. And when I first learned about Kyzatrex is a few years ago now, I had a concierge physician that I was working with, and I asked him, I was like, hey, have you heard about this oral testosterone? He's like, no, oral testosterone causes liver problems. And that's what I had learned in medical school too. Of course, when I researched Kyzatrex, I found out it absolutely does not cause any liver problems. But what is unique about your formulation, how it works? Tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. So as you mentioned, Kyzatrex is not liver toxic. So Kyzatrex is actually absorbed through the lymphatic system or the small intestine. So it bypasses the liver. What's unique about the formulation is that we use something called phytosterols. in the formulation. And generally, these are plant sterols. They're often supplements to aid in lipid health, or they're actually used in food additives to, again, claim heart healthiness, right? So Cheerios is able to claim that through the addition of plant sterols into the product. So we actually use that as a solubilizer to increase the bioavailability of the testosterone and get through the system. And that really is the most unique aspect of Kyzatrex, because this is the first time it's been used not only in a testosterone product, but in any pharmaceutical product as a non-active ingredient in the manner that we did.
I like that. So it's interesting because I know that I believe you guys were the third oral testosterone to market. And the other ones, actually, you had to like eat a lot of fat with them to get them to absorb. And I'm guessing that it's these phytosterols. And for those who don't know, sterols is just like a chemical bond formation, but it's kind of like a plant cholesterol kind of
Exactly.
thing. And so somehow you guys are able to get the body to absorb with these plant cholesterols instead of somebody having to eat like 40 grams of fat.
Correct. Exactly. So yeah, historical and other versions of testosterone, sometimes you see that 30 to 50 gram fat recommendation. We're still, Kyzatrex, you're still recommended to eat with food to help that absorption, but we've demonstrated efficacious results, whether it's a low fat, medium fat, or high fat meal. So it was an intuitive phase 3 design that let people choose what do they normally do, and let that guide be their diet, and then see how Kyzatrex performed. And as we know, right, the results were quite strong.
Awesome. Well, I'd love for you to educate the audience a little bit on why has testosterone gotten a bad rap in the past, and what have we learned in recent years that makes you so excited about this?
Sure. So I think, we'll probably rewind back to the early 90s, 1990 actually, when Congress scheduled testosterone as a controlled substance. So this was really the result of an outcry of the Olympics. So Ben Johnson, Canadian sprinter, tested positive. U.S. didn't win, and U.S. is leader in global sports. That was an outcry. So what happened was Congress actually went forward and proposed scheduling testosterone. What was interesting at the time, the FDA was against it, the DEA was against it, the AMA, the American Medical Association, was also against this. So it really was sort of out of left field, but at the time, too, you really didn't have any strong proponents to say, hey, look, no, this is wrong, from an industry perspective, and kind of fight that fight. So testosterone, naturally, again, was scheduled, so it's a controlled substance, even, fast forward all the way today. And then I think you layer on top of that, we've had these blips, especially still in that sports performance world, that, okay, hey, look, they're taking steroids. You have the baseball sagas that occurred, and a lot of outcry of cheating, right? This has sort of just been associated with that culture. And I think you add on top of that today, the modern male who's thinking about testosterone therapy, prior to orals, the only or the primary mode has been injections, right? There have been gels that have its place in the market, but that's really only a small percentage. You add on top of it that the therapy is primarily, has been an injectable. So you have folks that have controlled substance, this sort of steroid notion, and then you're injecting yourself, right? I think I can see why even a much, the right patient could be questioning themselves at the time of doing this. And actually, again, as you say about, you talk about medical school earlier, hormones really weren't taught in medical school. So you have this gap, honestly, in provider education when most folks want to go to their primary care if they have one, hopefully. And they kind of are inquisitive about this sometimes if they know what to ask for. And you're often met with a response from PCPs or endocrinologists, frankly, as well, that why do you want to test this? Why do you want to know this? Right? Something, unless something's massively wrong, we should not be looking at this, right? And I think that has, again, fueled this perspective for the average patient that, testosterone may not be that important. Maybe it's bad. It's just not a lot of good information. When, in fact, really the opposite is true. If you think about testing, testosterone could be the single most telling biomarker in a blood test, because typically we're testing cholesterol, right? So we're looking at your cardiac profile, or you're looking at insulin and glucose sensitivity, right, to understand that portion of your mechanics. But if you test your testosterone, you'll have an insight into what is your cardiovascular health, what is that insulin sensitivity look like, potential inflammation in the body, and so on, right? So again, I think it's for what we can do is educate patients to say, why. Here's why it's important, as we bring back sort of that provider education, and I think everyone gets in line.
Yeah. It's, I went to med school from 2004 to 2008, and it's not that I didn't learn about hormones. I was told they were bad, right?
Okay.
Like I was told that, prescribing testosterone, unless somebody's testosterone was like non-existent, for like a male is like under 200, unless it was like under 200, like you shouldn't do anything for that male. And for women, we didn't even talk about it, right? Like for females, like testosterone, what woman needs testosterone? And now I feel like we're at this it's early, but I feel like it's finally changing, where we actually have good science behind testosterone for men and women. And so I'd love to hear, like, what are some of the studies that have come out recently that make you more confident that, this is so important for people to learn about?
Right, and it's a good point, right? The study, the literature, that's out there is actually quite strong, right? Because again, testosterone's been used for a very long time, definitely in men, and as you say, it's becoming more understood on the female side. But the science and the literature, even going back to when I first got involved, was quite strong, right? And it's continued to get better. So I think what I would a few things that I would bring up in terms of the literature that is pretty recent to. That's encouraging for folks just trying to understand this, is you have something called the Traverse study. So this was the largest randomized placebo-controlled double-blind trial in testosterone history. And this read out just in June of 23, so a little over about a year and a half ago. This unequivocally said there is no cardiovascular risk with testosterone therapy. And again, this was answering that question back from 15. The FDA actually mandated this study be done by industry to demonstrate whether there is or is not cardiovascular risk. So that's extremely positive, because I think it lets the conversation shift from, is this risky, to what are the benefits that we can derive from this, right? Is it purely a general metabolic improvement? Is it cardiovascular health? Is it symptomatic improvement for patients that may be experiencing fatigue or libido issues, right? Although these are all tied together, it lets people really peel back and say, okay, where should we deploy this? So again, I will caveat that we are doing some of this research right now. I think that's, I can't say that, hey, it's all been done, but I think we do want to continue and further help people understand, especially now with orals in the mix, and the power of, we can talk more about this in a bit, is the daily circadian rhythm, right? I think mimicking that is actually proving to be quite beneficial to patients. But in terms of other studies, in 2020, T4DM came out. So this is testosterone for diabetes, and it looked at the rates of progression of prediabetes to type 2 diabetes, and actually the remission of type 2 diabetes in men on testosterone therapy. And the results were significant. The results were actually, in that study, better than what metformin was able to produce in its pivotal study. So again, we have a type 2 diabetes it's an epidemic here as well, right? I don't think there's really probably a better word for it. And how are we treating it, right? We are basically maybe some lifestyle interventions. Obviously, you have insulin and you have other type 2 diabetes medications, but testosterone has a very important, or potentially very important, role there. So again, that's research that we want to do, but we know as a mechanism testosterone improves insulin sensitivity. So again, there's a lot you can extrapolate there in how helpful it can be in this in this health condition, right?
Yeah. I one thing I loved about the Traverse trial also is it's not like they took healthy men to say, is this safe? Like they took sick men, men in their 60s, men with heart disease, men with like diabetes,
Prior
and
MIs as
yeah,
well.
prior heart attacks, and then said, actually, this is completely safe. And yes, if it decreases your chances of diabetes, like people don't realize how terrible metabolic disease is. Like metabolic disease increases your risk for cancer, Alzheimer's, heart attack. Like if we have something that we can give people that makes their metabolic disease better, like that's a huge win. One thing that you mentioned that I would love you to go a little deeper on is kind of what's unique about oral versus people hear about pellets, people hear about shots. Like what is unique about oral and how it works more like your body?
Sure. So I think, again, there are a couple different forms of testosterone that are on the market. Primarily, injections are used, pellets are alongside it, and then gels, probably, again, small, but in that mix. So when we look at hormones and replacement therapy, what we want to aim for or should aim for is really the mimicking of how our body naturally produces these things. Because even when taking testosterone, it's not foreign to your body. When you put it in, your body knows exactly what to do with it. So it's not altering some pathways and mechanisms, which, in typical pharmaceuticals, that's really what leads to these side effects. But your body is very familiar with this, and it can put it to work right away. So in these other modalities, generally you're seeing them in a long-acting form. Even injections, generally, people are taking them for a 1 or 2 week time frame. That's where you really get this large spike, and then it will kind of come crashing down to that trough before your next injection. And that's just not how you produce. Actually, one of our docs uses a great analogy. He said, okay, on Monday morning, would you wake up and have 10 cups of coffee for the week and
Right.
get through, right? No, you wouldn't, because that's not how the body works. So again, oral, you're taking it on a daily basis. Actually, Kyzatrex is BID, so you're taking it twice a day. And typically what we're seeing is by the end of the day, this is generally being flushed from your system. So at the end of the day, your pituitary axis, the one that's responsible for making testosterone, potentially switches back on and says, okay, look, we don't have this exogenous testosterone. Let's get to work. And we see that reflected in some of the lab parameters. They're referred to like LH and FSH. Although they come down on Kyzatrex, they still stay at the lower end of normal range. Typically on injection therapy, and I'm using this because, again, this is the most common modality, those numbers are undetectable, right? So it's safe to then assume that your pituitary axis that's responsible for hormone production is not on at all. So what we see in mimicking this, we don't have to take patients to a super physiological high that's going to last for days, because that's how long it's going to be, and longer till their next treatment. We're able to bring them into the adequate range, what they need for that day, and then that is going to flush through their system by the end of the day, and you do it again tomorrow. And again, just what I'll say there is on the safety side, what we've seen with things like Kyzatrex are, like say hematocrit, which is long been known or discussed as, hey, this is a side effect. Elevated hematocrit, high red blood cell counts. Less than 2% of patients on Kyzatrex actually had these elevated hematocrit levels. And then they can be brought back down with titration. Conversion to estrogen is minimal. Again, LH and FSH stay on lower end of normal range. Actually, we're running a pilot study on fertility and sperm analysis to understand what are the implications there, right? So I think what we've seen is by mimicking your more natural physiological state, it can help avoid, potentially, some of the outside effects you see with other longer acting therapies.
I think So I want to double click on that for the audience. Like one reason that I really like Kyzatrex, and honestly, like it's our first line. If somebody's going to start testosterone, we don't offer any other therapy other than oral Kyzatrex. And the reason is, as a clinician, it is so much easier to take care of my patient because I don't have to worry about their blood counts going too high. I don't have to worry about their blood pressure going too high. Like I know that your drug still has to have the black box warning about blood
Correct.
pressure just because all forms of testosterone get the same label, no matter what the testosterone is. But and then the part about preserved LH and FSH, like you said, what that means is your fertility could still be there where other forms, long acting forms, completely shut off your fertility and your testicles atrophy, so they shrink and they're not producing any sperm. And I mean, it's just like thing after thing. It makes it, as a clinician, it's like the easiest medication to administer and to monitor in the class by far.
Yeah.
So I think it's worth kind of double clicking on those things.
I think it's good to know because those are the points that the broader clinician community really needs to learn about and understand. And again, kind of back to the beginning when I say educate, right? That's the goal here. How do we educate this broader community so that they can be there for their patients, right? If they
Yeah.
understand these things and feel better about the therapy, then it may be an option, right? I do envision a world in maybe a couple of years time frame where primary care is able to look at this again because one, again, the role of testosterone is really understood and like vitamin D 30 years ago nobody talked about. Now they say, look, this is important. We need to make sure that people are adequate because we want to stave off potentially downstream disease and the implications that come with testosterone deficiency because those things have been well documented. And now we have a tool to do it, and we feel it's easy to manage. We understand the stress of the system. They got 7 minutes with these patients at best. How can they really bring up this topic, say here's a potential solution, and say try it. Let's monitor it. Let's see how you do in 3 months. But I feel
Yeah.
comfortable with giving you the option to try this when historically they've totally shied away from it.
Right. Yeah. And partly because with long acting, there are these things that you have to worry about. You have to worry about blood pressure. You have to worry about hematocrit. I mean, I've had patients who have come off of blood pressure medicines, like they've been on injections and they've been able to come off of blood pressure medicines after switching to Kyzatrex. And then, other patients who are just poorly managed where they're getting a shot once a month. So they have like crazy high levels for a week and a half and then no testosterone for weeks, and it just makes it so simple. So
I think
I
it's interesting that you say that,
yeah,
right? Even then, like again, they're kind of having these high levels,
yeah,
but still, generally the therapy is safe, right?
yeah,
So that's actually really good to know because again, as you mentioned, right, Kyzatrex, yes, we still have a black box warning around blood pressure and a lot of class label implications, whether that is around prostate and so forth. And
yeah,
I think it's really important to know. I think the Traverse changes a lot of that.
yeah,
Frankly, I'm surprised the FDA hasn't actually come in and changed the labels themselves yet, because this is the data they've asked for. But that is definitely a core focus for Marius in 2025. We need to sort of liberate these labels given the science and what we know is solid. And then, even again, a controlled substance. Testosterone should not be a controlled substance. And if we're able to change that, I think the perception around the therapy changes. Again, there's more access, there's more willingness to understand this, and that has a positive knockdown effect if we're able to do this, which again we are actively working on.
oh, that's awesome. I mean, the bottom line is people are going to get access to safe or unsafe drugs, like if they're highly motivated, right? So we know the bodybuilder community, a lot of black market slash uh you know gym bro drugs out there. And it would be so much better to have a safe, tested drug available for use to people who need it than people going and seeking something that's unsafe. So I really hope that those things change. FDA is so slow to change. But hey, I'm really excited about Marty Makary possibly
Yep.
being the FDA head, and I could see him being somebody who would push for change like this.
Huge advocate for hormone therapy, and actually
Yeah.
that's why we've started a nonprofit. And this is really just getting out of the gate. It's called the Testosterone Project, and it's focused on three things, and all in this sort of domain that we talked about. One is testosterone testing standard on the blood panels. So I think actually the U.S. Prevention Task Force should be listing this as a critical, a must test, because the cost is, again, very little. I mean,
Yep.
testosterone test is sub $10, but the insights that you can glean are again very strong, and an early warning indicator in a lot of ways if they're not already symptomatic. So testing really needs to be standard, both on the male and female side, because again, we know, but I'm not sure if the broader public knows. Premenopausal women have 4 to 5 times the amount of testosterone than they do estrogen. So
Yep.
it is very much a female hormone and a critical hormone. And we've seen anecdotally how this has changed lives when females are on HRT, including testosterone. So testing is really important. The second is a pathway for an FDA-approved female testosterone, because this has been, again, it's been a male-dominated thing. We know it affects both sexes. On the male side, it's very much regarded as, hey, you have testosterone deficiency, let's replace it. But on the female side, it's really being regarded as a treatment potentially for HSDD, or hypersexual disorder, or FSD, those terms. When if it affects a man in all of these ways, from cognition to cardiovascular to bone, muscle health, and whatnot, we know it does the same thing to females. Why is it regarded differently, right?
Yeah.
And finding a way to create a pathway so that females can have an approved version of this as well. So again, gets rid of the misconceptions and so forth. Very critical. And the last one is descheduling, right? Again, I think this is going to change the face of it quite dramatically.
Yeah. And we have a lot of female members of Bionic Health, and this is huge for them. I mean, there are 0 FDA approved testosterones for females in the US, which is crazy. And the fact that women's testosterone, the amount of testosterone in their body is much higher than estrogen in their body premenopausal. And like, most people don't realize that the total amount of the hormone is higher for testosterone than estrogen. And it's crazy that then we just decide, oh, that hormone that you had for, say, 50 years of your life, oh, it's not important anymore. When we know with estrogen and progesterone, like, we've got good research now, the Women's Health Initiative completely debunked now, like, this is important for you to replace estrogen and progesterone. It's just as important to replace testosterone. So that would be huge if you guys were able to get an FDA approved.
Absolutely. No, we're looking forward to again, actively working on it with a more friendly, or I don't want to say friendly, thoughtful FDA.
Yeah.
I think that's really the key here, because how do we use science and what we know in a positive way for, we're all citizens here, right? So that's the job of the agency. Yes, safety is key, but I think we've been pretty, it's been pretty clear. These are safe things. How do you make sure they're accessible?
Yeah. And it would be interesting to have it on the task force, the preventive task force blood panel. There was the research study, I believe just last 12 months, that showed if you're hypogonadal, your risk of death is higher. So if you have super low testosterone, your risk of death is higher. Like, why would that not be something we want to prevent? So that would be awesome also.
Agreed. Yeah, I think the downstream, and this is what people need to talk about more, right? The downstream impacts of testosterone deficiency are, again, very well documented and quite severe, whether they're inflammatory related, cardiovascular related, diabetes related, cognitive, right? I mean, testosterone deficiency leads to an accumulation of tau proteins. And tau proteins are the main targets in most Alzheimer drugs that are either in development or approved. So if we know this, I think actually I would call on establishments like the NIH to really visit this and vigorously, because we have potential solutions here if we can do the research, and at large they're cost effective, right? So at the end of the day, we're trying to save the system money and have better outcomes, right? That combination is really the job of healthcare experts. So Yeah, we really look forward to trying to push these forward at more real world paces, because again, you know, a lot of these things. I understand sort of the gold standard double blind placebo, but you know, I'll use an example like the GLP-1s, like just maybe 10 days ago or so it came out. Zepbound came out and said, hey, look, our data is better than Wegovy. Yeah, we
Yep.
knew that like 2 years ago.
Yeah, we did.
we all practicing clinicians understood that, but you know, they had to wait for this trial to come out and say it.
Yeah.
So think about all the dollars that could have been invested elsewhere to help prove out some other scenarios for this class of drugs that again could really be helpful in ultimate, you know, better patient care or better outcomes. I think we need to find a way with the administration to bring forward some of this research.
Yeah. And I think it's really a focus on health rather than sickness. And I think that that is so important also to understand around testosterone is like, what are the other diseases we can prevent? Like, I feel like testosterone is very similar to a GLP-1. Like these GLP-1 studies keep coming out like, oh, it helps with heart disease. Oh, it helps with Alzheimer's. Oh, the same thing when you look at testosterone. Oh, it helps with heart disease. It helps with metabolic disease. It helps, like, very, very similar. And I feel like when people understand, and what's interesting is anecdotally from my patients, you know, somebody might start it with the hope that they're going to, you know, just feel better, have better libido, have more energy. And what I see is it's their mood goes up. They do add more muscle mass. Like it's pretty amazing. And the way I know it's super amazing is if they decide to stop, if they say, "Hey, Jared, you know, I'm gonna take a little break," then that's usually the biggest difference for them is they feel that difference when they
On
come
off,
off and they're like, "Oh, absolutely. I want to restart, please." Like
right?
I feel so much better when my testosterone is optimized versus, and I'm curious your thoughts on kind of optimized testosterone versus, you know, barely normal testosterone.
Right. So yeah, I think I'm definitely a big believer in optimization, right? So, preface here again, Kyzatrex is only indicated for low testosterone and due to certain conditions. But I think if we look at all other sort of biomarkers and what we're doing in health optimization, you know, we have these ranges. What is the right number for each individual is certainly different. Um, but if we know we can be better functioning at a different level and achieve that safely, I think there is definitely merit in investigating this further, right? And again, we have the amazing thing is we have the diagnostics today to show this. So if I was, you know, close to what's considered the normal range, and what the problem is, so just pausing on that for 1 second, this normal range has continued to shift,
Yeah.
right? As our population has become sicker, you know, every 5 years or so when these are reevaluated, the normal range keeps shifting lower. So that lower cutoff went from, you know, 350 actually a number of years ago, not too long ago. So now you're in the mid 200s or low 200s, depending on the reference ranges. So that goalpost moving is not helpful
Yeah.
for patients. But say you're somewhere in that close to normal, you know, lower end of normal range. I think that again, through diagnostics, you can certainly make the case to say, hey, look, if I'm optimizing at a better level. And what's interesting about Kyzatrex we didn't talk about is the ability to lower a protein called SHBG and increase free testosterone. So often we have elevated SHBGs, these levels, whether it's age, drinking, lifestyles, other conditions, and that controls your free T. So if we can move that free T up without your total T, again, you get a lot of the benefits of therapy without super physiological levels. But again, if I have an elevated inflammatory markers, right, or potentially my fasting insulin is high, and I can bring those down with testosterone therapy, that is certainly something that clinicians, which they're already doing actually,
Yeah.
which is a nice thing. Clinicians that are educated on this, they're already using this as a tool in their toolbox because they have the ultimate sort of ability, right? Versus whatever the drug may say. And I think 70% of drugs are used in this manner.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think again from a cost-effective and a known perspective, right? I think people are spending a lot of money on supplements today, in the hopes of optimization, and there really just is not a lot of good data. I mean, some folks at the higher end of that supplement pyramid, maybe they do have clinical data and they spent the time, which I certainly applaud, right? Because you want to know, okay, what's the impact? You're doing something, just like, again, you're in the gym, you want to see, okay, today I'm lifting 50 pounds, and if I keep at this, I should go up to 60 and 70 pounds. That progress, right? Like, everything today has been quantifiable. That's why we wear wearables, right? Can we, why is everybody so obsessed with this data? I think if we can show this, maybe from 50 to 70, you're going to have that progression, right? I think about it in longevity. I think about it this way. A lot of people talk about, okay, what is longevity? What's the purpose, right? It's to extend a healthier lifespan or health span,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Primarily, and stave off main disease. And what are these four main diseases, four horsemen that they mainly talk about? Cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, dementia, and cancer.
Yep.
Testosterone has a specific role in each one of these issues. So, again, if I'm deficient, why would I not think about this and really, really dive in to understand what kind of implications? Am I at more increased risk? Can I help to a certain degree? I think there's certainly argument for looking at this, evaluating this, and then clinicians, advising patients appropriately.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that I really appreciate about what you guys have done is you went to a cash pay model and a direct model where people don't go through insurance. And, of course, I get a little bit of pushback from my members when they're like, hey, I want to submit this to insurance. And I say, this isn't like something you're going to submit to insurance. You're going to pay cash for it. But I think when people go through the prior auth and the denial and end up with a super high cost drug, like the other oral medications, if you were to pay cash for them, they're insanely expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that model also. And I'm curious, like, what made you decide to move in that direction?
Sure. I think the decision really came from, again, an access perspective. We were looking at traditional models with the insurance companies and the payers, the PBMs, and we, all our work, and we've looked into it, right, quite a bit, that we were going to have to increase the cost of our drugs significantly to rebate the system, and then potentially you get a coverage that is not really ideal. Right, so we're increasing costs, and then we're still going to potentially have these hoops. Not potentially, we will definitely have these hoops that providers do not like today. So the prior auths and the step edit are very big, and that's why a lot of clinician offices today have refused to do testosterone therapy because it's so taxing on the staff. And then again, the return is little, so they don't want to do that. And if they don't want to do that, they're not going to do it for us. They're not going to do it for they want to do it for the patients. So they're definitely not going to be able to get over that hump for Kyzatrex. And at that point, we kind of thought we'd be dead in the water. And then if you do all that and the drug gets semi-covered, that copay has risen so high through the years. There's a high chance or high probability that copay is not too different than the cash price of the drug.
Yep.
So, we thought, let's remove the barriers. Again, I mentioned supplements earlier. People are spending a lot of money, honestly, monthly on supplements, on different regimes and even proteins and whatnot. So there's a place for everything. But in the scheme of things, we thought, hey, if we can come in with something really affordable here, patients will adopt. And they're actually paying it, right? I mean, again, they're happy once they're on therapy. I think we've seen the explosion of, I think these are not, I think, Bionic is definitely a much more comprehensive, thoughtful model, but we've seen a lot of, say, testosterone clinics that have popped up across the country, and these are often injection-based. They often charge their patients $200 a month, right? So that doesn't make any sense in the scheme of things when injections are relatively cheap. So again, I think for us, we really said this is how we increase access. We reduce costs. We don't have to play the pharmaceutical game of knocking on every office and doing that, because that's just not efficient. We really just create a system that is conducive for everyone to do well and feel well.
Yeah. Well, Shalin, I love what you guys are doing at Marius. I love your product, Kyzatrex. It really is, I believe, life changing for the individuals who are on it. Where can people learn more? Where should people kind of learn more about testosterone? Learn about Marius?
Sure. So I think I would go to Kyzatrex.com to learn specifically about that. That's KYZATREX.com, Kyzatrex. And then I would also spend time on our disease website. So this is rethinktestosterone.com. And this really, we were talking about literature before. We've included a tremendous amount of studies here. And actually, what we've written the blogs and gone into deep depth so people can really understand what is this role of testosterone in the human body. So I think Rethink is a great resource. And then I mentioned the Testosterone Project. This is the nonprofit patient advocacy. So that's testosteroneproject.com. And these are all resources, right? At the end of the day, we do see ourselves as stewards for the patient here. And we love for more folks to join us on the journey.
Awesome. Well, I'm definitely cheering for you. I'd love to see a female product. I'd love to see the black box disappear, like all those things you talked about. So thanks so much, Shalin. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jared. Take care.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Medicine 3.0. We make this podcast so that you know where to turn for good information on keeping you and your loved ones healthy. Feel free to check us out at bionichealth.com, where we can help you live a longer, happier life.